Hello, and thanks for joining today's webinar for CIEE's Teach in South Korea programs. My name is Luke. I'm going to be your presenter today. We're glad to see that you're interested in teaching in South Korea. Here's an overview of what we're going to cover today. We'll start with an introduction to CIE and myself. We'll talk about the reasons why people are interested in teaching abroad and what makes it such a great experience. We'll zoom in and look at the differences, compare and contrast the public and private school jobs that are available in South Korea. We'll talk about different ways you can get there, including through a CIEE program. We'll talk about why you might choose CIE, what benefits and features we offer. We'll talk about TEFL, teaching English as a foreign language, and how that fits into this picture. And of course, we'll have lots of time for questions. So if you have any questions, either now or during the presentation or at the end, you can type them in using that question feature on your webinar tools. Let's start out now. What questions do you want to know about South Korea? What information are you hoping to learn? I'm going to keep presenting, but go ahead and type in your answers so we can work through those questions throughout the presentation. CIE has been a leader in international education exchanges since just after World War II. So we just celebrated our 70th anniversary. We have a really wide variety of programs, including teach abroad, study abroad, high school exchange programs, some gap year programs, and work exchanges as well. We focus on delivering really high quality programs that are relevant and interesting, and we deliver a really high level of support from a really dedicated staff, headquartered in Portland, Maine, but with other staff located around the world in a lot of the countries where we have programs. My name again is Luke. I've been working for CIE for over 4 years now. I am the coordinator for programs in South Korea, in China, and Morocco. I know a little bit about the rest of our 12 countries where we have CIE Teach Abroad programs as well. So today, of course, we're focusing on South Korea. I do like to ask people to reflect for a minute before we really get started and ask where your journey will take you. It's easy to think of these as commodities, but you take it off the shelf and pay for it, and it's the same as anyone else's experience that you saw on Facebook or heard about. But in reality, we're all individuals. We all have our own backgrounds and cultures, our own needs and desires and goals. And what happens is these programs, these experiences turn out to be very unique as well. So two people on the same CIE Teach Abroad program in the same city might have very different experiences. And that's okay. That's the way it should be. So it's important to acknowledge that going in and to think about where you're coming from, and where you want this program to take you, and what you see yourself doing while you're there and learning. And that's your starting point for your journey. South Korea is the destination. It's a busy, hopping place. It's a very interesting and unique culture. It has thousands of years of its own history. It is a proud nation with a long history and a lot of traditions and cultural values that are very deep and can be quite different from the United States, from North America. It's a place that's both very modern and very traditional at the same time. You'll see skyscrapers. Of course, this is one of the biggest economies in the world. I think it's number 12 on the list. In spite of being a very small country, about the size of Indiana, it's a powerhouse. Everybody around the world knows about Samsung and LG, these big Korean companies. It has its own language, of course, which is fairly easy to learn because it has an alphabet, which is pretty cool. The booming economy means that it's interconnected, it's globalized. It's a major U.S. ally, and English is in high demand in South Korea. It's famous as a marketplace for foreign native English speaker teachers to go and teach English to other people. And because of that demand, the salaries can be quite high. It's definitely a selling point of the country. And it's a pretty safe place to be. Crime is extremely low in South Korea compared to the United States. And in spite of North Korea being in the headlines, South Korea continues to be a stable and prosperous place. They probably know more about how to deal with their neighbors than we do here in the United States. And whatever crazy headlines are in the news in the U.S., South Koreans are usually just going about their business, going to school, going to work. They've been peaceful and prosperous for 60 years, and they don't see that changing anytime soon. So South Korea is a destination that's very appealing. There are lots of other reasons why teaching abroad, beyond just travel and seeing a new place, it's a very people-oriented experience. If you're teaching English abroad, you're automatically connected with this group of people who are your students and your colleagues. And they have families, and you'll meet some parents of your children in your classes. Your colleagues will go out socially together and go on trips and go for dinners and things. So it's an experience full of people, which is really great. And being a CIE teacher adds another layer on top of that. You can see a bunch of CIE participants in this picture from our South Korea program, that you're going to have peers around you, other people who are teaching in South Korea just like you are, who are learning the same things and going through the same experiences. So you have another layer of people on top of that. South Korean food is great. There's a lot of spicy and sour flavors that people say sometimes take a little getting used to, but by the end of the program, people are saying the food is something they're going to miss the most. There's lots of great little 24-hour Korean food stores that are selling Korean fast food, which is delicious and a lot healthier than North American fast food. So it's really cool if you're a foodie or totally new, or if you're already a veteran of different Asian cuisines. There's something for everybody in South Korea. Something a little less tangible are the skills that you exercise and develop as a English teacher abroad. Maybe you're lining up to be a career teacher, and that's wonderful. Maybe you're not, and that's great too. Putting yourself outside your comfort zone and teaching actually develops a whole lot of skills that are helpful for everybody, whether or not you're a teacher in the long term. This list we put together very quickly. It's very easy to see how things like public speaking, presenting are related to teaching, but also dealing with intercultural differences, figuring out how to work with people in a workplace that has different cultural norms from what you're used to, when to be kind of independent and take charge and take initiative, or learning when the time is right to be flexible and go with somebody else's plan, or be patient if things aren't happening as fast as you'd like. These are skills that are really helpful in any job, and we really think that teaching abroad is a cool opportunity for personal development. The language and culture, of course. You can study a language and read about a culture forever, but there's really no substitute for going there in person. And that's something that people also say is very important for them as they are going to teach English abroad. So that's the why. That's why people teach abroad. Let's zoom in and look at the positions that are available in South Korea. The job is to be an English teacher, teaching English as a second language to young students. We're talking primary school. So it might be kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade. You start seeing a little bit less of fifth and sixth grade, which I think is these teachers and the students in the pictures here. But generally speaking, South Korea, you're teaching young kids. And whether it's a public school or a private school, you can expect a pretty nice array of benefits. You get paid well for doing this. You're getting 2 million won a month, or a little bit more than that at some schools. With the current exchange rate, that's around $1,800 per month. That's a 12-month contract. At the end of 12 months, you get a completion bonus, which is equal to 1 month's pay. So you're essentially getting paid 13 months for 12 months work, which is, with a salary like that, that's a pretty big bonus. You also receive rent-free accommodations from your employer. This is huge. It means that instead of spending 30 or 40 or 50% of your salary on rent and housing, you're spending 0%, which lets people really save a lot of money, even transfer it back home to keep making a car payment or a student loan payment. On top of that, teachers also receive one-way airfare. Some private schools will buy this for you, but if a school is not going to buy it for you, they'll reimburse it for you. So that's a really nice benefit on top of an already pretty generous package. If people ask me, where do I go if I want to earn the most money? I tell them South Korea. As I've mentioned, there's two options for how to get a job teaching in South Korea: public schools and private schools. We'll talk briefly about both types now. Public schools represent a minority of our teachers that go to South Korea, mostly because they are more competitive and have a kind of a picky application process, which is a little more work to prepare. It's really important to apply early and get started as soon as you can if you're going to try to aim for these EPIC public schools. EPIC is a Korean government agency that places foreign teachers at schools. So after your CIE's application is complete, we can help you prepare an application that EPIC will hopefully like. And if you're accepted by EPIC, they will work on placing you in a region of South Korea to work in public schools. These jobs are desirable. They're prestigious, but they also have fewer working hours and more vacation, which is nice compared to private schools. Class sizes are larger. 20 to 30 is normal. You do have Korean co-teachers in most of your classes. They're probably still going to expect you to be the lead teacher, but they'll be there to support you in the classroom. So the amount of lesson prep and lesson planning is about the same between public and private schools. There's just a little bit more support for the larger class sizes with the public schools. Public schools will give all their teachers a flat rate travel allowance when they arrive, 1.3 million won, which is about enough to cover a one-way ticket to South Korea. Public schools the program's actually been shrinking recently, which means there are now fewer public school teachers, EPIC teachers, than there are schools that are signed up with the program. What that means is you're not going to have other foreign teachers at your school, and you will probably rotate between 2 to 3 schools on different days during the week. Private schools, this is kind of the opposite. It's common to have multiple foreign teachers at the same school. These are more numerous positions. There's a lot of them. They are for-profit businesses that sometimes have longer working hours and shorter vacations. The standard contract for private schools is 30 contact teaching hours per week. That means 30 hours in front of students, not including things like lesson planning, break time, staff meetings, periods in between classes. Both of them are really full-time jobs. Private schools, you don't have a co-teacher, but your class sizes are smaller. And again, these schools will either buy or reimburse one-way airfare for you to South Korea. Here's a look at the eligibility requirements for our Teach in South Korea program. All teachers will need a bachelor's degree in any field. You'll need to be a native speaker of English and have citizenship of the US, UK, Ireland, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, or South Africa. You must also have a criminal background, criminal history that's 100% clear. So no records or arrests, charges on your criminal history. That's a visa requirement for South Korea. Public schools have a little bit tighter eligibility requirements beyond those requirements above. You must also have one of the following 3 credentials: either a TEFL certificate, or a bachelor's degree of education or teaching, or a valid teaching license, which does not include substitute teaching. CIE's program is set up to help teachers get a TEFL certificate. That's our most popular program in South Korea, is our Teach in South Korea services, along with some TEFL training. We'll talk more about TEFL in a few slides. Private schools are a little more flexible. They prefer to have candidates with one of those 3 credentials, but it's not a strict requirement. Another important difference between the types of placements in South Korea relates to locations and where you might be placed. With public schools, you have a little bit less control over placements. At the end of your application process with EPIC, you'll be assigned to a province. So if you look on the left, you can see these different provinces and then a few metropolitan regions like Daegu, Seoul, Incheon, Daejeon. You'll get to pick one of those as your preference. And then at the end of the EPIC application process, you'll be assigned to one of these colored regions. That's all the information you'll have when you get on a plane. The final placements within that province and the specific school and city are not assigned until after the end of your EPIC orientation, so about a week after you arrive. Private schools, on the other hand, give you more control over locations. You'll be presented with job opportunities with a quick summary of the benefits, including the location of the school, before you interview with that school, which means if it's in a place you really don't want to be, you can decline an interview and then wait for the next job. So that gives you a little bit more fine-tuned control over where your job opportunities are happening. You'll see in the map we've charted out a sample of our recent private school placements in South Korea. Each pin represents a teacher placed in that area. The darker the pin, there's a higher concentration of teachers placed there. So you'll see there's a concentration of teachers in Daegu in the southeast, another one in Gwangju in the southwest. But most of our teachers are clustered around Seoul and Incheon in the northern part of the country. It's a mega city. It has about, I think, 25 million people, and it's spread out. There's a lot of satellite cities. So you'll see there's a real cluster, not just in the center of Seoul, but also in lots of little cities immediately around it, connected by transit. A couple other considerations just to know as you're sort of weighing these 2 school types. As I mentioned, EPIC has an extra application process. They're very picky about letters of recommendation. I can send more information about that by email if folks want. They do require special documentation if you happen to be homeschooled, if you have full-time teaching experience, or if you had education from 7th grade through university in a non-English speaking country. They're going to want to see documentation that education was done in English. And they have an EPIC orientation on arrival. On the other hand, the private schools are, as I mentioned, they're for-profit businesses. A lot of teachers end up working evening shifts, like 11 to 7 or 2 to 10, at least a few days out of the week, maybe not every day. The reason for this is South Korean students often go to both types of schools. In the US, you can go to a public school or you can go to a private school. You can't really go to both. In South Korea, most students go to both. They'll go to public school during regular public school hours, and then when that's finished, they'll have a snack or have a meal and turn around and go to school again a second time at a private school to keep focusing on English, science, mathematics, whatever subjects they're paying extra to keep studying with. There's a really strong expectation of academic achievement and study in South Korea. Another difference between public and private schools. For public schools, the TEFL certificate must be done before you travel. For private schools, they're more flexible. It's quite common, actually, to have teachers come in last minute, sign up for a TEFL course, and travel to South Korea with a TEFL course that's only half done. And then they can finish up the course after they arrive because it's an online course. Something that private schools like to see in the hiring process is a short video introduction. This is optional, but we can help you do one if you'd like to. We have some instructions written up. Private schools have a relatively low level of training between when you arrive and when your teaching starts. They're not really great at training their teachers. They're mostly focused on getting a teacher into rotation so they can take over a class, especially if there's a vacancy on their staff. All teachers will be, first they'll be enrolled in CIEE's pre-departure course, which has a lot of information and discussions that you need to know before you go. All teachers will also be invited to our in-country orientation and networking weekend in Seoul within a few weeks of arrival. So all the EPIC teachers and all the private school teachers will be invited at a couple of different dates and shifts to come up to Seoul to meet our in-country staff and talk together, kind of compare and contrast their experiences and keep that discussion going of what's going on in South Korea and how to succeed. So that's what the jobs are like. The next question is, how do you get there? How do you get one of these jobs? There's really three main options to make that happen. The first one is to do it on your own. If you're already really informed and have great advice from people and know what you need, people can and do get jobs in South Korea on their own. Another option is to use a recruiter. There's lots of services that won't charge you anything, and they'll help you get a job in South Korea. The reality there is that these recruiters are being paid by the schools. They receive a commission for placement from each school where they place teachers, which if everything goes well and you wind up at a good school, that's fine. But if there's issues, if there's disagreements, if there's questions about your contract, if you need some support, they might not be that interested in helping you because you're not paying them, whereas the schools are paying them. So if there's a disagreement between you and the school, they might not be there to support you quite to the same extent. The final option would be to go through a program like CIEE. We do charge a program fee for our services, but in exchange for that, we give you the highest possible level of preparation and support. Starting with webinars like this one, walking you through the process of getting documents ready, visa guidance, and then support after you arrive from our in-country representatives. We like to call this the CIE difference. So the job placement, the actual matching up with a job in South Korea is the centerpiece. It's the keystone that makes everything fit together and make sense. But just a job by itself is not enough to really give you a successful experience and give you what you need to succeed. So that's where all of our other services come in. We'll talk about the 150-hour TEFL course in a moment. We mentioned guidance for visas and interviews. That in-country orientation is a great time to get some perspective on your job from other people who are going through similar things, as well as our experienced teachers and experienced staff who can let you know how that looks to them and what to expect. U.S. citizens and residents will receive emergency travel and medical insurance for use overseas. That's an extra layer of safety net in case you're traveling to or from South Korea or something happens before your South Korean insurance is set up. Our staff representatives in Seoul are there to pick up the phone 24/7 if you have some kind of dire emergency. You have a team there to support you. And then there's our alumni team, which is now, I think it's almost 350,000 people. If you're interested in international networking, it's a great opportunity. So that's CIE Teach Abroad. For the last part of the webinar, we're going to zoom in on CIE TEFL. Our sister department offers a online training course in teaching English as a foreign language. This is designed essentially as a crash course for someone who didn't major in education for their bachelor's degree, but needs some training on how to teach and how to teach English. So if you already have an education degree, you probably don't need this. But if you don't have any experience teaching English, it might be really helpful for you. And for most schools in South Korea, it'll meet their eligibility requirements. So we're talking about those EPIC public school placements, as well as most private employers in South Korea. This is really an industry standard, and if you don't have teaching experience and you don't have TEFL, you're really putting yourself at a big competitive disadvantage because there's thousands of teacher candidates applying for jobs in South Korea, and most of them have TEFL. So we actually designed this course ourselves. We'd found that a lot of the online options that were available 5 or 6 years ago just weren't that great. And it was really cheap, and you'd be graded by a computer, and you'd line up with a piece of paper that might help you get a job, but you didn't really get much preparation out of it. So we built our own TEFL course. We cap our class sizes at 13. You'll do online readings, some online videos, prepare some assignments each week, and then each week our classes with the instructor meet together in a video conference, kind of like a discussion section does at a university class. So there's 11 weeks of coursework and class meetings. And then there's also a 20-hour practicum component. This is a real-world extension of the course. You will find an organization in your community that will let you observe or do some volunteer teaching for ESL, and then you'll rack up some volunteer hours there. Up to 20 hours is the requirement. You can do more than that, of course, either observing or practicing ESL instruction in the real world. So you can try out what's going on, what's getting talked about in your course. Our Teach in South Korea program includes TEFL by default for a total program fee of $1,900. If you don't need TEFL, you can select our Teach in South Korea Basics option, which has a program fee of $1,300. Okay, last bit of information for you, our dates and deadlines. We're now accepting for the following 2 seasons, spring and fall 2018. For spring 2018, you'll want to get your application in by October 1st. That's our application deadline for spring. The schools will be hiring in November through January, and teachers will start in late February for the most part. For next fall, we are encouraging public school teachers to apply extra early, since the fall season is very competitive for public schools. We have a February 1st deadline in order to apply for a fall 2018 program. Private schools, they're a little bit slower to get started and not as competitive, so we have an April 1st deadline there. And the start dates for the fall, we're looking at August or September. So that's it. We've come to the end of our presentation for today. I hope it's been informative. So let's open this up for questions. I'm going to step away for a second. Please use the questions tool on your webinar features to type in whatever questions you have about South Korea, about CIE, about TEFL. What would you like to know? I'm here to help. Okay, we have a few good questions coming in. The first question is about the application timeline for Epic Public Schools for spring 2018. Is there an application deadline for Epic? How does that work? So Epic does not have a hard deadline to submit applications to the Epic agency over in South Korea, but they do, their program does fill up each season. And they do review candidates and assign placements first come, first served. That means that the sooner you can apply, the better. And that if you apply relatively later in the program season, even if they're still accepting applications, they might not have your first choice of location. That's a pretty common scenario with EPIC. Related question, how hard is it to get a job in Seoul at a public school through EPIC? I have not placed a EPIC public school teacher in Seoul on our program. And the reason for that is it's the most competitive location on the program, and most of our applicants who end up going on the program don't have an education degree and several years of experience. So I encourage people not to put Seoul as their preference unless they have that, unless they have an education degree and several years of experience, since I haven't seen it happen. That said, it's not hard at all to get placed in a city on the EPIC program. If being in a big urban metropolis is your number one priority, I encourage people to put Daegu as their placement preference, or Gwangju. Those are two large cities that have a really tight boundary of their province. Since they're basically like Washington, D.C. It doesn't belong to a state, it's its own area. So there's that way, which can get you, a very high probability of being in a densely urban area. Or the other approach would be to look at Gyeonggi-do province, which surrounds Seoul. If Seoul is a donut hole, it's its own little municipality. Gyeonggi-do is the rest of the donut. So if you want to be close to Seoul, but you'd be okay being in a small city, then Gyeonggi-do is a good preference to put as well. It's a lot larger than Seoul, a lot less competitive. Those are the options I recommend for folks on EPIC who want to be in a big city or who want to be close to Seoul. Good questions. Okay, next question. How much does the TEFL certification cost, and how long does it take to get? Our TEFL course, we have sessions starting every 2 weeks, which is nice, and it takes between 11 and 15 weeks to complete. So around 3 months, maybe 4. If you do the practicum at the same time as you're doing the online coursework, that brings the time down to around 11 weeks. If you need to wait until your coursework is done before you're able to do the practicum, that might stretch it out to 15 weeks, give or take. TEFL is included in our CIE Teach in South Korea program. You don't have to apply for it separately. You don't have to have it completed by the time you apply to us. Our Teach in South Korea program, including TEFL, costs $1,900, and that's what most people do. All right, someone's asking if they can get some more details on those provinces I just mentioned in South Korea. So I'm going to go back to the map slide. Okay, if you can see my mouse, I'm circling Seoul. Seoul is this little tiny area here. It's very competitive. We place a few private school teachers in Seoul, but not all that many. We place most of our private school teachers, as you can see on this map, immediately around Seoul, so in Incheon and in Gyeonggi provinces. If you're applying to EPIC, unless you have an education degree and several years experienced teacher, I don't recommend applying to Seoul because it is so competitive. Instead, I recommend applying to Gyeonggi province if it's really important that you be close to Seoul. Incheon also fills up pretty quickly. If what's really important for you is to be in a bustling cosmopolitan urban area, I'd recommend picking Daejeon or Daegu. You'll see these are a lot smaller than Gyeonggi-do, which means that more like Seoul. It's a municipality, not a province. There are parts of Gyeonggi province that have trees in them and are a little bit more rural. It is pretty densely developed, so nobody's getting placed out in the sticks in South Korea. But again, you might be kind of far from Seoul here and in a really small city, whereas Daejeon, Daegu, Gwangju, these are all big cities. I think each has at least 1.5 million people. So depending what you want, if you want close to Seoul, we can do that with Gyeonggi province. If you want big city, we can do that with one of these 3 cities here. Busan has a rule that they don't accept online TEFL courses for EPIC eligibility purposes. So I don't really recommend Busan as a destination unless you have an education degree or a teaching license to meet that requirement. Yeah, and if you're looking at private schools, it's quite easy to get placed in Greater Seoul. Again, you might be an hour train ride or an hour and a half bus ride from the center, but the public transit in South Korea is really good. It really puts the U.S. to shame. So I want to reassure you that people aren't getting placed in really rural placements if they don't want to be, and it's not hard to get placed in a major city. Next question, is there an age cap to teach in South Korea? Yes. EPIC has a limit of 62 years old to apply to the EPIC Public Schools program. In practice, the private schools are very reluctant to hire anybody over 45 years old. I think we've placed one person as old as 56 in South Korea, but they're definitely the outlier, the exception that proves the rule, I think. So you can give it a shot up to 62 with the EPIC program. It's pretty hard to find a job for someone over 45 at a private school. What else can I advise? If folks are retirement age, China is good up to 60. They have a limit of 60 years old to be able to get a work permit in China. Our Teach in Thailand program is maybe the best place for folks who are over 60 years old to try to find a job. Next question is, where do you stay for the week after arrival in South Korea before you're placed into a city? Is this paid for out of pocket or included in CIE's program fee? I think that's a question about the EPIC program. So what happens when you arrive with EPIC is you go immediately, EPIC picks you up at the airport, and you go immediately to a public school EPIC orientation, which is kind of at a university campus. They'll put you up in a dorm room for the week during the orientation with another teacher of the same gender. Meals, activities, panel discussions, administrative stuff. And then at the end of the week, they will reveal exactly where everybody's going within their province, which they knew ahead of time. And then they will split people up and the schools will come pick you up. With private schools, you would be met at the airport either by a CIE representative or by a representative from your school. If they're nearby to the airport up in Incheon, they might take you directly there by car to your school or accommodations, depending on if it's the beginning of the day or the end of the day. Most people get on a intercity bus from the airport and would get taken down to Daejeon or Daegu, for example, or the far side of Seoul. And then a school rep would meet them at the bus and then take them either to the school or to the accommodations. Another question, how many years do members of the CIE program typically spend in South Korea? A little hard to say. I think there's a good number of people who stay for a second year. Our program is for 1 year only. By the time someone is renewing with their same school, that's very easy to do directly, and people don't involve CIE, and that's fine. That's as it should be. They've sort of reached a higher level of preparation because of our program that lets them really be experts on the ESL scene in South Korea. So we don't have hard statistics on that. It's quite easy to renew if your school likes your performance, and if you want to stay, they usually will ask you to stay. Some people continue and get jobs at a different employer. There's a lot of options there. Someone says, if I have a teaching license but not in English, will I still need TEFL? I think the answer is it depends. If your license is still valid, it will probably meet EPIC's eligibility requirements. I'd have to take a look to advise you further on that, but good question. If you want to email me a scan, I'm happy to get into it in more detail. Okay, it sounds like questions are starting to slow down. So if you have another thought, that's a question in the back of your mind that hasn't been asked or answered yet, please go ahead and type it in now. I've got one or two more, so you've still got time to get your questions in. Here's two related questions. Is there a chance to request placement in certain areas through CIEE? Related question is, how popular is Jeju Island? You can absolutely express a placement preference. We'll do our best to match it up. If we think it's really unlikely or maybe unrealistic, we'll tell you so and maybe talk more about why you want to be in that position and what we can do to help you find a placement that will provide that. You can see on the map pretty clearly where most of our placements are. If you wanted to be, way on the eastern coast of South Korea, where there's a lot less population, that might be a bit tricky. We can certainly try. Most of our placements are concentrated either in or next to South Korea's major cities: Seoul, Incheon, Daejeon, Daegu. Chuncheon is a city down in the south, and then Gwangju City. Okay, another question. How long is the visa for? Your visa is for slightly longer than your contract for South Korea. So the contracts are for 12 months from the first day you start working. The visas will the visa will let you get a residency and work permit for a period of 12 months. Once those 12 months are up, you can usually stay up to 90 days more using the tourist permission on your passport. So at that point, you're no longer a resident, you're no longer an employee in South Korea, you're back to being a U.S. visitor. And U.S. visitors are eligible for 90 days in the country, even if they don't have a job or a residency permit. So you can stay a little bit beyond the end of your contract if you want to, but then you'd have to leave the country at the end of that. Another question, will knowing Korean either hurt or help you getting jobs? It's hard to say. I think I've heard of situations where private schools hire someone who speaks Korean and English so that they can help deal with parents. You might be doing phone calls to parents or parent-teacher conferences or grade reports, whereas the foreign teacher next to you who doesn't speak Korean might not be doing those things. I will say it's sometimes harder for Asian Americans to get placement on this program, especially with private schools. This is because of an appearance thing. They're for-profit businesses, and a lot of times when they tell parents they have foreign teachers working at their school, they don't expect to see Asian American teachers. And some employers, not all, but some private school employers would be reluctant to hire Asian Americans, which is a real bummer. CIE obviously doesn't think that's sensible at all, and we work with a lot of people and have placed plenty of Asian Americans in Seoul, in South Korea. It just makes it a little bit more of an uphill climb, but absolutely within range. So it's something to keep in mind when you're figuring out how flexible you're going to be about location, for example. It might be that you need a little more flexibility about location in order to get that job for that reason. Last question, how long are the teaching contracts for? Those contracts are all for 12 months. We don't have anything shorter than 12 months in South Korea. It's pretty standard. They do have a summer break, and especially at public schools, the students have time off. A lot of the Korean teachers have time off in the summer as well, but the foreign English teachers are kept around to work on things like adult ed, summer school. They often have summer language camps that take place at public school campuses during the summer. So there's still work over the summer, and our foreign teachers will keep working at that point. All right, we are a little over time for the webinar, but I want to thank you for joining. I want to thank you for asking such good questions. If you have more questions, or if you want to send me a scan of a document to check out, my email address is on the screen. It's also sometimes helpful to give a call to talk things over the phone. My number's there as well. I'm available weekdays 9 to 5 Eastern time. And yeah, we're wide open for spring 2018, fall 2018. If you want to go to South Korea in February, try to get your CIEE application in as soon as you can. Our deadline was October 1st, but you don't have to wait until then. You can get started next week if you want to. It'll be advantageous for you. So that's where we are. That's our program. Thanks again for joining, and I look forward to speaking to some of you in the future and reading your applications. Have a great day, everyone.